Hello everyone and welcome to week 1 of EUN120 Curriculum and Pedagogy 1 Foundations. We're going to start this unit by posing the question, what is curriculum? In the pre-workshop activities and using a Padlet, you were asked what the word curriculum meant. So the first thing we're going to do is use your answers from the Padlet to construct a brainstorm. We will do this in class face-to-face, record it and then post it online for those students who are external to the university. If we take the word back to its roots, the word curriculum comes from the Latin word currere, which literally means to run a course or a race. This is an interesting metaphor to draw on when we think about curriculum. Is it the course or the race itself, in other words, looking at the word as a noun? Or is it the latter way of thinking, a verb, as in the running of the course? Indeed, in 1987, Portelli, an Italian academic, found more than 120 differing definitions for curriculum in the academic literature. So let's look at some of these definitions. If we look at Robin Ewing's definition from 2010, and she's a professor in curriculum from the University of Sydney, she states that curriculum and assessment are made up of stories and storylines that change in their emphasis and intensity depending on the beliefs, values, motivations, and thus perceptions of the curriculum players or characters at a particular point in time. In other words, what she is saying is that beliefs about and understandings of curriculum shift and change depending on the political, social, cultural and economic imperatives of the time. Therefore, what we need to take from this is that curriculum documents are not neutral, but creatures of time, place and politics. In week 3, we will look in general at the national curriculum document for Australia, the Australian curriculum, and then with your discipline area experts, you will look at this in more detail for your second teaching area in years 7 to 10. So what I'm suggesting is that what really needs to be looked at critically is what has been included in those documents, but also what has been excluded. In other words, what counts as valued knowledge at this particular point in time. And indeed, who are the curriculum players that are the voices of authority on this? Is the Australian curriculum in your discipline area relevant or appropriate for the social reality in Australia today? Two interesting activities that you may like to think about and discuss and investigate a little further. So I will put these in the post-workshop activities by way of reflection on the lecture today are: what subjects did you do when you were at school? Are they still part of the curriculum today? And secondly, look at a curriculum document from another country or jurisdiction. What is the same? What is different? What is counted as valid knowledge in that country or jurisdiction? If we take a step back in time, there have been many models for curriculum throughout the decades. Here I'm going to go into two. So going back to 1949, Ralph Tyler, from his publication Basic Principles of Curriculum and Instruction, posed 4 basic principles, also known as Tyler's rationale, which are useful for you to think about as you start on this curriculum journey. Number 1, purpose. What educational purpose should schools seek to attain? Secondly, learning experiences. What educational experiences can be provided that are likely to attain these purposes? Thirdly, organization. How can these educational experiences be effectively organized? And lastly, evaluation. How can we determine whether these purposes are being attained? So what is easy to see here from Tyler's rationale is that what is taught, how it is taught, and how what is taught can be assessed are very hard to separate. Another curriculum model worth noting is that of Hilda Taba, sometimes referred to as the grassroots model. She worked with Tyler, but saw his rationale as being more of an administrative model whereas she was more concerned with the development of the learner. The steps to her model are shown on the slide. Diagnosis of the needs of students, development of objectives, then selection of content to match those objectives, organizing that content, selecting the learning experiences, organizing the learning experiences, and then determining what and how to evaluate the experiences. So it's easy to see the similarities between these models, but that isn't surprising, as both were really heavily influenced by John Dewey, an American philosopher whose ideas have influenced education and social reform and continue to do so today. The next slide shows some of Dewey's quotes so that you can get a glimpse of how he believed a decent education would create free and independent human beings, thus developing a free and democratic society. And I'll let you read them to yourselves as you pause the PowerPoint. I would like you to bear these models in mind as we look at some more definitions. So from your set text for this subject, Marsha's Becoming a Teacher, the authors pose various questions about what curriculum means. Is it something that's taught in schools? Is it a set of subjects like maths, English, science, etc.? Is it a set of performance objectives, in other words, knowledge and skills that students should attain? Is it what society or the community wants? Is it what governments tell us we have to teach? Is it content, resources, sets of materials, or indeed is it a combination of all of the above and even a little bit more? These authors also refer to the interchangeability of the word, where quite often the word syllabus is used. What this usually refers to is a summary statement of content, in other words, what is to be taught. But this definition does not tell you anything about how that content is to be taught, or anything about the students sitting in front of you in a class. Clandinin and Connolly in 1991 attempted to broaden the definition of curriculum in terms of that which an individual experiences as a result of schooling. Here, the emphasis is placed on the student as a self-motivated learner exploring their human potential through the wealth of experiences that they bring with them. This way of thinking may be more in line with Taba's grassroots model. These authors, Clark, Pittaway and Marsh, the authors of your set text, prefer to define curriculum as an interrelated set of planned content and experiences in which a student engages within the context of the school and under the guidance of teachers. So you can see both Tyler's and Taba's thoughts in this definition, and they've represented their way of thinking in the following diagram. So what can be seen from this diagram is that content and experiences are planned and learning happens through exchanges or communication between both teachers and students as they engage in certain tasks and activities over a period of time in the school context. However, question, does this definition go far enough? Are there some ideas from the earlier models that are missing? And what I would suggest is missing here is the latter part about evaluation. A recent publication by Jean Allen and Simone White is Learning to Teach in a New Era. They build on the work from Basil Bernstein, who is a British sociologist known for his work in the sociology of education. Bernstein often talked about the three message systems of education: curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. Allen and White have added a fourth message to these original three, which has emerged in the 21st century: reporting. And indeed, as pre-service teachers in this era, this will become very important for you. And we will look at that in a lot of detail in week 10, where you have to report or show evidence of your work against the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. You will also complete various activities on this as you proceed through the course, working towards your Teaching Performance Assessment. The Teaching Performance Assessment, or TPA, is introduced in EUN101, a unit that you are doing at the minute. So let's have a look at Allen and White's model, which they refer to as the principle of alignment. So what the diagram shows is how all four messages align. This means that what you teach should match up with how you teach it and also how you assess and report on it. So as you can see on the diagram, the learner is at the center, who is influenced by interests, capabilities, social and cultural identities. And around that you have teachers who are also influenced by these factors, as well as their beliefs about learners, learning, and their professional identities. Professional identity is something you are looking at in EUN 101 as well. Of course, the context is also important. So around learner and teacher, you have a circle for context. So you really need to look at the location of your school context. Is it rural or remote? Is it a large metropolitan school in an urban area? You need to look at the economics of the area, the social, the cultural factors. Does your school have a large indigenous population, a large immigrant population, and so on? You will look in a lot more detail at these aspects in the other units you are doing for this semester, EUN 103, 104, and 105. The four message systems are spelled out around this. The curriculum is seen as knowledge that is valued, and the question asked is, what do we want learners to know, understand, and be able to do? In the pedagogy quadrant, we need to consider the characteristics of the learners and how they learn, and what approaches will be best to achieve that learning. We will look at this in a lot more detail next week when we delve into teaching and learning approaches or pedagogies. The assessment quadrant is about looking for evidence of learning. Just because you teach a class something does not mean that they have understood and learned it. The question here is, how do we know learning has occurred, and what does it look like? As I said, we will delve into this for you as pre-service teachers in week 10. Lastly, reporting, where the purpose and the audience must be taken into consideration, and we need to think about how we use that for evidence of learning. So even these newer texts don't exactly look at curriculum in the same way. If we go back through time to earlier educational theorists, they have used various classifications to try to explain curriculum in a bit more detail. So let's look at the work of Larry Kubin from 1995. He suggests that there are at least 4 different curricula in use in our schools: official, taught, learned, and tested. By official, he meant what the federal, state or district officials set forth as what should be taught in schools. In the context of Australia, and more specifically for you, Queensland, in years 7 to 10, we follow a national curriculum, the Australian curriculum, put forward by the the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, abbreviated to ACARA. And in years 11 and 12, we follow a state curriculum put forward by the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority, abbreviated to QCAA. Australia has been a site of major curriculum change in the last few years, and changes will continue in Queensland over the next few years. Your discipline area experts will give you more background on this for each of your teaching areas. Kubin's second type of curriculum is the taught curriculum. This is what teachers actually decide to teach based on the official curriculum. Their decisions will be based on their subject knowledge and likes and dislikes of various topics. And sometimes this is referred to as the enacted curriculum. The third type, according to Kubin, is the learned curriculum. This is what the student actually learns in the classroom as a result of what is taught from the official curriculum. And sometimes this is referred to as the experienced curriculum. Lastly, the tested curriculum. This is what students are tested on. Some have criticised the tested curriculum, for example Lowry, as only a limited part of what is intended by policymakers, taught by teachers, and learned by students. Other educational theorists have also used other terms with regards to curriculum. For example, Elliot Eisner. In 1994, Eisner used the terms explicit and implicit. By explicit, he was referring to what may be Cuban's official and taught curricula, but he saw this as only a small part of what schools actually teach. Other terms have been used for this category, including mandated, formal, pre-active, planned, or intended. By the implicit curriculum, Eisner was referring to the type of curriculum taught in a school because of the type of place a school is, the various approaches that are used, the context, the buildings, the reward systems, and so on. Sometimes this is referred to as the hidden curriculum or the unofficial curriculum. This involves knowing and understanding the implicit values, norms, beliefs, and assumptions that underpin rules, regulations, rituals that learners encounter as part of their schooling. The hidden curriculum is rarely questioned, but contains knowledge of authority, power, compliance systems that are regarded by society as important. So this could include things like timetables or school uniforms, etc. Another category for Eisner was the null curriculum. And by this he meant what was left out, as he saw this as just as important as what was taught. Considering the null curriculum asks curriculum players to look at what knowledge and intellectual processes are neglected or absent. And again, this is something that you can look at with your discipline area experts for your second teaching area. Here are some other terms that you may encounter as you delve into reading about curriculum more thoroughly. The first one, the curriculum gap. This is the gap between what was planned and what actually happens in classrooms. The quote on the next slide shows this in more detail. It comes from Ball, Maguire and Braun's book from the UK, How Schools Do Policy, Policy Enactments in Secondary Schools. So I'll just flick to this and then I'll flick back to this slide. Many of the studies that explore how policies, including curriculum, are put into practice talk of implementation, which is generally seen as either a top-down or bottom-up process of making policy work. In contrast, we see policy enactments as a dynamic and non-linear aspect of the whole complex that makes up the policy process, of which policy in school is just one part. Policies begin at different points and they have different trajectories and lifespans. Some are mandated, others strongly recommended or suggested. Some policies are formulated above and others are produced in schools or by local authorities, or they just simply become fashionable approaches in practice with no clear beginning. So what's the take-home message here from this quote? That there is a curriculum gap between what policymakers intend the official curriculum to be and how teachers interpret and translate such policy or curriculum into practice. So a lot depends on you as a teacher. Will you have a readerly approach to curriculum documents? In other words, you look at them as a prescription. Or will you have a writerly approach? In other words, you interpret and you translate to give students the best learning experience that you can based on your knowledge. So it is important for you to know that as a teacher, you are an enactor of the curriculum rather than just a deliverer or an implementer. This view of teacher as an actor or curriculum maker has implications for how you see yourself as a professional. Rather than a technician in the school context, you need to think about how you are going to engage with theories of learning and pedagogy at a level broader than just the required curriculum of the day. Another phrase you might come across is negotiated curriculum. This allows for student agency in the learning process, and by the time you get to your last curriculum unit, the Learning Project in Curriculum and Pedagogy 6, the assessment piece is a negotiated task. In this final unit, your desires and interests are central to the learning process, where what is taught will be a planned negotiation between you and your tutor. High and low definition. This refers to how prescriptive curriculum materials are. High definition allows for little flexibility and are characterized by set texts, materials and tasks, lesson plans, unit plans, some which are tightly scripted. For example, Curriculum into the Classroom, or C2C, which was a strategy employed by Education Queensland to support its schools with the implementation of the Australian curriculum and to assist them to meet its goals for state schooling. One vision, one curriculum, one platform, different ways. The senior syllabi in Queensland are moving in this direction. On the other hand, low definition only gives suggested approaches. So curriculum is not just a sequence of content. It is so much more. For example, Noddings believes we need a moral and ethical curriculum based on caring relationships. Curriculum should contribute to a caring society that values all people, going back to what Dewey said. Egan, another writer in 2005, was concerned that we don't provide enough opportunities for creativity and imagination to prepare for a future that we don't know. In week 3, we will look at the Melbourne Declaration and the Australian curriculum in more detail to see if we can see some of these theories and ideas on curriculum coming through. Additionally, theorists have identified a number of curriculum orientations. As we delve further into our official curriculum documents, see if you can see what orientations influence. The two that I've pointed out here are by Eisner and Valance from 1974 and Brady and Kennedy from 1999. So when you are looking at your curriculum documents with your discipline area experts, you need to see what the orientation is, and you also need to see where you sit within that orientation. Academic rationalists, so reinforcing traditional subject matter and disciplines as organised fields of study. Curriculum with set content and sequence. Is that what the Australian curriculum is like? Social reconstructionist or critical. This has a focus on social values. It equips students to contribute to social and cultural change with the view of creating a more humane and equitable society. Is there anything in your curriculum document that alludes to that way of thinking? Self-actualization or humanistic considers the whole being and encourages the development of individual identity. Curriculum evolves from the interest of the learners. Technical prescriptive, a means-end model where curriculum is conceived of as a technological process that produces certain outcomes. And the last one, cognitive, emphasizing the ability to think, reason and problem solve. Processes are generalizable from one subject to the other, and they align with Brady and Kennedy's way of thinking along the lines of cultural, social, personal and vocational. So in conclusion then, the word curriculum is contested. It does not have a definite definition. But what we do need to remember is that curriculum documents are not neutral, but products of time, place and politics. Various models and terms and classifications have been used through time to try to provide better understandings for those in the education system. What you need to understand is your role as a curriculum player, enactor or maker, and what orientation suits you to give the students a positive learning experience so that they become active and informed members of society. This is a very important job, and I think it's summed up very well in the quote by Yeats on the slide. Making decisions about curriculum is never simply about what works or effective learning. It always entails values and commitments about what students should learn, reflecting choices and purposes about the kinds of outcomes we want to produce for young people. So that's it for this lecture. Welcome to EUN120 and happy reading about curriculum. Thank you.